Hey biology, sorry you're getting this video so late. We are going to discuss chapter 4.3 through 4.5. Just jot down some things in your notes. There will be instructions on Edmodo, and here we go. Okay, so in chapter 4.3 we talked about succession. Succession is basically predictable changes in an environment after something has happened to a community. Or basically if nothing's ever happened to a community, it's how organisms basically will grow into that community. So there are two different types of succession, and it begins, the one that begins in an area with no remnants of older community is primary succession. So that's this picture right there that just showed up. When existing communities are not completely destroyed, so there's like some topsoil already there, we call that secondary succession, so like a fire that you see in the next picture. So primary succession can happen after a volcano explodes. So it basically leaves just new land or sterilized old land. So just nothing on the rock. Retreating glaciers can also have the same effect. And then the first species that colonize these areas, these barren areas, we called them pioneer species. And that's kind of easy to remember because pioneers go discover new places. Lichen, which is a mutualistic symbiotic relationship between fungus and alga, is one type of pioneer species that will grow on rocks. So they're actually ones that we pretty much know. We're going to see them first, and then what they can do is they can actually over time fix nitrogen into a usable form, which is important for us because we know that we can't take nitrogen in, and so that's going to increase biodiversity. They're going to break down old rock, turning that into then subsoil. Secondary succession happens faster than primary succession because soil's already survived. It doesn't need to be made. So as a result, new and surviving vegetation can regrow rapidly. And that's it for succession. It's pretty easy, just predicted changes in our environment. We know how things will happen. Eventually, once you get enough species, you're going to reach a climax community, and those communities basically will grow, or basically the biggest that they'll grow. Some disturbances that actually will not allow a community to get back to their climax community would be something like human interactions. So humans, if we tear down the rainforest, okay, and we log the rainforest and then we build cities on top of that, there's no way that rainforest is ever going to make it back to the climax community that it was. So with all the rich biodiversity inside of it. So the next one we're going to talk about is the biomes. I'm just going to go through the slides quickly. If you want to pause and look at some of the things you can, but we've already created a data table over this. What you want to know about the biomes is basically the general temperature and climate that you see within them. So like a desert, obviously a desert's going to be dry and it's going to be hot during the day, cold at night because there's no sun. Or you need to know that the tundra is recognized by permafrost, and which is basically frozen topsoil. So make sure you know those things about the biome. Again, we talked about the most important things. There's only going to be like 4 questions on your test over the different biomes, and they're very basic. So if you have that basic knowledge, of the desert's hot, you should be good. So what is a biome? A biome is described in terms of abiotic factors like climate and soil, and biotic factors like the plants and animals that live in them. So we have different biomes all around the world, and again, latitude helps describe those biomes, not longitude. So where they're seen in regards to the equator will basically kind of give them a climate, and then certain animals will only be able to live in that certain climate. Alright, so again, I'm just going to kind of go through these quickly because we've already seen a lot of this, and we've talked about all of this. So you can pause the video if you want and you want to read everything, but you've already gotten this information. Okay, so this is one where what's not classified in biomes. There's a couple things not classified in biomes, and that's because we can't easily define like where they are, and we can't easily define like the types of plants and animals that live in them. So we would say mountain ranges. Mountain ranges are found all over the world, whether you're in Alaska or whether you're in Tennessee. We find them there. And so Alaskan mountain ranges are going to be vastly different than ones that we're going to find in Tennessee. So because they're at that different latitude, you're going to have vastly different plants and animals. And we would also say the same thing about polar ice caps. So we don't classify these into biomes. All right, now our aquatic ecosystem. Conditions underwater. So this picture right here is something that you're going to want to look at. You're going to see this on an important test. So you need to know the two different zones. So we have a zone where light can pass through, and that is our photic zone. When you hear photic, that like prefix the photo always means light. And if you think of photo meaning light, you can think of photosynthesis. So the photic zone is where basically photosynthesis can occur because light can get through that zone. And then we have the aphotic zone, and that's where photosynthesis can occur. So light isn't there. And so the types of organisms you're going to see there are those that can go through chemosynthesis. We have the benthic zone, and that's basically along the coast or at the bottom of lakes, streams, and oceans. Organisms that live on or in the rocks and sediments, we call those benthos. Just like biomes, temperature and nutrient availability influence an aquatic ecosystem. So a freshwater ecosystem, like rivers, we have rivers and streams. They often originate from underground sources in mountains or hills. Animals in rivers and streams depends on terrestrial plants and animals that live along their banks for food. We also have lakes and ponds. So basically, freshwater ecosystem, if I tell you, what are lakes and ponds? Is it freshwater or is it oceanic? And you have to be able to tell me that it's oceanic, depending on like what you're talking about, because we will talk about estuaries. So plankton, alga, and plants determine the food web of these lakes. Convection currents help distribute heat, oxygen, and nutrients. So if you remember, convection is basically the rising up of hot fluids and the sinking of cold fluids, creating these currents that continuously happen. A wetland, basically where we live, there's tons of wetlands. It's basically when an ecosystem is covered by water for part of the year and then not covered for other parts. So you basically have nice rich soil here. So it's nutrient rich, includes bogs, marshes, and swamps. Estuaries. An estuary is a special kind of wetland, and it's formed where a river meets a sea. It contains a mixture of fresh water and salt water, and they support an astonishing amount of biomass. So estuaries are actually really important for us. They serve as spawning and nursery grounds for many ecologically and commercially important fish and also shellfish species. So this is where we do a lot of our commercial fishing. All right, so now our marine ecosystems. Ecologists typically divide the ocean into zones based on depth and distance. Okay, so our first zone is the intertidal zone, and this zone is basically submerged in salt water during high tide and air during low tide. So we're going to see a good amount of plant life here. The coastal ocean, its water is brightly lit and is often supplied with nutrients by fresh water runoff and tends to be highly productive, meaning you see a good amount of biodiversity here. Now the open ocean, only some organisms can survive in the open ocean. So we have two different zones as well. So we have the photic open ocean, so where our phytoplankton can go through photosynthesis. So organisms that feed on that we'll find in those areas. It has low nutrient levels and only supports the smallest species of phytoplankton. So that's why you're not going to see tons of organisms here. Then we have the open ocean aphotic zone. Those are organisms that are going to basically depend on food that's dropped from organisms in the photic zone. And the primary source of energy there are organisms that can go through chemosynthesis, so they don't need sunlight to produce food. And I believe that's our last slide. So have a good weekend, or I hope you had a good weekend, and I will see you on Monday.